In this lesson, we're going to learn what it takes to get MongoDB up and running. And we're going to learn how to interact with the console, which is a nice, simple way to start using MongoDB. Now, MongoDB consists of two primary components. There's the server component, also known as a daemon, and there's a client. The server is what's traditionally known as your database. It houses all the data that you have. It organizes it, and it finds ways to retrieve it. It lives on at least one computer and possibly more. The client is either a software application using a database driver. So you might use something like PHP or JavaScript or Ruby or Python to interact with MongoDB using a MongoDB driver. Or you can use the MongoDB console, which is a nice and convenient way to interact with MongoDB. And it's particularly useful for development, testing, and administration. So in this lesson, we're going to learn a little bit about using MongoDB via the console. Now, to get MongoDB up and running, you have to run the server or daemon. There's several ways to run the server component. The most straightforward one for our purposes is to open up a console in your operating system and type MongoD, which D standing for daemon, and hit enter. Now, this might not immediately work for you, because in my case, for example, MongoD looks for the default data directory, which is at /data/db, and that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because I installed using the brew package manager, which puts this in another location. So in order to run it properly on my system, I have to type mongod --config, and then user local, etc., mongod.conf. And so this configuration file is going to include the data directory that brew designates for MongoDB. Now, when I hit enter, it's not actually going to do anything on my system because but when you do this, you should get the same thing without this prompt because the Mongo daemon will simply be running. And then to access it, you need to open a new command window and use the Mongo console. To use the Mongo console, simply type Mongo and hit enter, and it'll try to connect to the Mongo daemon at your local host. If you're using a remote server, you might need to pass some command line arguments. So if you type mongo --help, you'll see a bunch of help for the console, including --host, which is the server to connect to. So in this case, I might type mongo --host 127.0.0.1, which is the equivalent of accessing the local host, and is also the default for running Mongo. But if you had your database running somewhere else on the web or maybe on a local network, you can pass it an arbitrary IP address to connect. Now you'll see it connected to 127.0.0.1 default port and /test. The /test is the database that it connected to. So MongoDB can, like many other databases, contain several databases in one server process, which you can quickly have a look at if you type show dbs. You'll see there's a learn database. For me, there's a local database and there's a test database. Yours might not show as many or it might show more, but that's how to get a look at them. Now the Mongo console runs JavaScript, which means you can execute arbitrary commands, such as creating a variable, echoing that variable, adding variables, or calling arbitrary functions. It also means that if you type a function without parentheses, you'll see its definition. So if I type assert and hit enter, if it's not a MongoDB native command but a JavaScript command, it'll print out the function for assert, which sometimes helps you figure out what it does. You might be familiar with assert from programming somewhere else, and essentially it makes sure that something is as you want it to be during the execution of a program. So we assert on a condition and then type an error message. So if we assert true, nothing will happen. But if we assert false, you'll see MongoDB spits out an error according to the code in the function up here. But anyways, we need not bother much with assert right now. It's just an example of a function that will spit out the JavaScript definition when you type it without parentheses. Another such function might be the quit function. So as you can see here, if you type quit without parentheses, it'll print out the JavaScript of quit, which in here says is native code in brackets. And what that means is that MongoDB is using a bit of native operating system code to execute quit, because what quit does, it actually quits the console. Now if we open the console up again, there's a couple other ways to quit it. One is to hit Control-C to get out, and another one is to type exit to leave. Now quick recap what we learned in this lesson. We learned about the different components of MongoDB, namely the server, or the daemon process, and the client, which can either be an application using a MongoDB driver, or a console, which is convenient for testing or learning or administrating. We learned that the console runs JavaScript commands natively, and is quite versatile. And we'll go into more details in the next lesson.